Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going on a journey into the fascinating world of cannabinoids and hERG channels, taking a close look at how these compounds interact at a molecular level, especially concerning our hearts.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what's happening down at that level. And we're not just talking about the high that some cannabinoids are known for. We're going to really dive into how they affect hERG channels, which are super important for the heart's health.
Okay, so hERG channels, not exactly a term I hear every day. What are they exactly, and why should we care about what's going on with them in our hearts?
You can think of hERG channels like gatekeepers for the electrical activity in your heart. You know your heart beats in a steady rhythm, right? Well, it's because of electrical signals moving through the heart cells. And these hERG channels, they control the flow of these signals to keep everything in sync. They're essential for a healthy heartbeat.
So like tiny conductors making sure the heart's rhythm is on point.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But you mentioned these hERG channels can be affected by cannabinoids. Most people think of THC and CBD, but what do we really mean when we say cannabinoids?
Cannabinoids are basically a group of chemical compounds that interact with our body's endocannabinoid system. It's a complex system that helps to regulate all sorts of functions in your body. And there are actually natural cannabinoids found in cannabis, like THC and CBD, but our bodies produce their own versions too. Those are called endocannabinoids.
So it's like our bodies have their own internal cannabis system. That's wild. So THC and CBD are just two examples of a whole team of cannabinoids.
Exactly. And there are all sorts of players on this team. There's anandamide and 2-AG. Those are endocannabinoids our body produces naturally. And then you have the plant-derived cannabinoids like THC, which is known for its psychoactive effects, and CBD, which is non-psychoactive. People are exploring CBD for all sorts of potential benefits. And then you've got synthetic cannabinoids made in labs.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of. So how do all these cannabinoids tie back into our heart and those hERG channels? What happens when they interact?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Research suggests that some cannabinoids, particularly synthetic ones, can actually mess with hERG channels. They can block these channels from working properly. And remember, those channels are essential for regulating the heart's rhythm.
Okay, that sounds kind of alarming. What happens if a cannabinoid blocks those channels? What does that mean for our heart's health?
Imagine your heart's electrical system gets a little out of whack, kind of like a record player with speed problems. Blocking those hERG channels can really disrupt that delicate balance of electrical signals, and that can lead to a condition called long QT syndrome. It's a heart rhythm disorder that can actually be pretty serious.
That definitely sounds like something to take seriously. I'm curious, how does this blockage happen at the molecular level?
It's like a chain reaction on a tiny microscopic level. When a cannabinoid enters the picture, it can interact with receptors on the surface of heart cells called G-protein-coupled receptors, or GPCRs. These receptors are like antennas picking up signals from outside the cell.
GPCRs. Got it. So they're like docking stations where cannabinoids attach. What happens next?
Right. When the cannabinoid binds to the GPCR, it sets off a whole cascade of events inside the cell, like flipping a switch. And a key player in all of this is the G protein. These G proteins are like messengers that relay the signal from the GPCR to other parts of the cell.
So the GPCR receives the signal, then the G protein passes it on. It's like a relay race inside our cells.
Exactly. And this relay race involved other players too, called second messengers. One of these is cyclic AMP or AMP. You can think of it like a volume knob that controls different processes in the cell. In this case, when that G protein is activated, it actually leads to a decrease in SANCAMP levels.
Okay, CMP, another player in the game.
Yeah.
So what happens when the volume gets turned down on the CAMP? What impact does that have on the heart?
That decrease in CAMP ultimately affects the activity of our star player, the hERG channel. Essentially, some cannabinoids, through this whole chain of reactions, can indirectly turn down the volume on that hERG channel, and that's what can potentially lead to the heart rhythm problems we were talking about.
It's fascinating how something so tiny, like a cannabinoid molecule, can trigger such a complex chain of events inside our cells and affect something as vital as our heartbeat.
It really shows how interconnected everything is in our body and how even small interactions at the molecular level can have a ripple effect.
So we've got this complex interplay between cannabinoids and hERG channels, and it has some important implications for heart health. What's next? It's all really intriguing.
Now that we've covered the basics, we can get into the specifics of different cannabinoids and how each of them affects hERG channels. Remember, not all cannabinoids are created equal. Some have a much stronger impact than others. Welcome back to our exploration of cannabinoids and their interactions with hERG channels.
It's amazing how much we've already learned about these little gatekeepers in our hearts. and how they can be affected by different cannabinoids.
Yeah, definitely. And now that we've got a good handle on the basics, we can start to look at some specific types of cannabinoids and how they each influence hERG channel activity.
That's what I'm really curious about. We've been talking about cannabinoids in general, but what about the ones we hear about all the time, THC and CBD? Do they both affect hERG channels in the same way?
That's a great question, and the answer isn't so simple. The research on the effects of THC and CBD on hERG channels is still ongoing, and the findings are a bit more nuanced, especially compared to some of the synthetic cannabinoids.
So it's not as straightforward as all cannabinoids block hERG channels?
Exactly. When it comes to THC, some studies suggest that it might block hERG channels, but the concentrations needed to see that effect are often way higher than what people normally consume.
So does that mean THC is in the clear when it comes to potential heart risks?
Well, not necessarily. We have to remember that everyone's body is different. Things like genetics, individual health conditions, and even the type of cannabis product can all influence how someone responds to THC. More research is definitely needed to really nail down the risks and the potential benefits.
Okay, how about CBD? It's often talked about as having therapeutic potential. Does it pose a risk to hERG channels as well?
CBD is a really interesting case. Some studies suggest that it could actually have the opposite effect on hERG channels compared to some other cannabinoids. Instead of blocking them, CBD might actually enhance their activity.
Enhance. So instead of turning down the volume, it might actually turn it up. That's kind of surprising if other cannabinoids had a blocking effect.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but that's what makes scientific exploration so fascinating. We're constantly discovering new and unexpected things. This potential effect of CBD on hERG channels is something researchers are actively investigating, especially for possible therapeutic uses, particularly for conditions where hERG channel dysfunction is a factor.
Yeah. So CBD might not only be safe for the heart, but it could actually be beneficial in some cases. That's amazing. The more we learn about cannabinoids, the more complex and interesting they become.
Absolutely. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Each layer reveals new insights and potential therapeutic avenues. Speaking of therapeutic avenues, this brings us to another exciting area: personalized medicine.
Personalized medicine, I've heard that term. But how does it connect to cannabinoids and hERG channels?
Personalized medicine is all about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare and recognizing that everyone's body is unique, including their endocannabinoid system.
So instead of assuming everyone will react the same way to a standard dose of CBD or THC, we're looking at what makes each person's endocannabinoid system unique.
Exactly. It's about understanding your unique endocannabinoid tone, which is like a snapshot of your body's endocannabinoid system at a particular moment. This means looking at things like the levels of endocannabinoids in your system, the activity of the enzymes that break them down, and the sensitivity of your cannabinoid receptors.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually measure all that? Is there like a endocannabinoid test you can take?
We're not quite there yet with a widely available test, but scientists are definitely working on it. They're developing reliable methods to assess someone's endocannabinoid tone, and this could involve blood tests, saliva tests, or even genetic testing to see if someone has specific gene variants that affect their endocannabinoid system.
It's pretty amazing to think that one day we might be able to get our endocannabinoid system analyzed, like a blood panel, and get personalized guidance on cannabinoid use.
That's the goal. And this brings us back to hERG channels. We know that genetic variations can influence how they work. Some people might have gene variants that make their hERG channels more sensitive to being blocked by certain cannabinoids. Having that information could be crucial in preventing negative effects.
So if someone has a genetic predisposition to hERG channel issues, they could be advised on which cannabinoids to avoid or to use consciously. That's incredibly valuable information.
It really is. Personalized medicine, especially when we factor in this interaction between cannabinoids and hERG channels, could totally revolutionize how we approach cannabis use. It's all about ensuring both safety and effectiveness.
This all sounds so promising, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what are some of the key questions that scientists are trying to answer right now about cannabinoids and hERG channels?
One of the biggest questions is figuring out exactly how different cannabinoids interact with hERG channels at a molecular level. We've talked about the general signaling cascade, but there's still a lot of details to uncover. Researchers are looking at the specific binding sites on the hERG channel, the roles of different G protein subtypes, and how other signaling pathways might be involved.
So it's like putting together a really complex puzzle, understanding each piece and how it fits into the big picture.
Exactly. Another important area of research is looking at the potential long-term effects of cannabinoid use on heart health. We've talked about the immediate effects on hERG channels, but what happens with chronic use? Are there cumulative effects? Does tolerance develop? These are all crucial questions that scientists are trying to answer.
It seems like we still have a lot to learn, but it's exciting that the research is moving forward.
Hmm.
Speaking of things we're still learning about, we talked about synthetic cannabinoids earlier, and they seem to be the main culprits when it comes to hERG channel blockage. What makes them so different from natural cannabinoids?
Synthetic cannabinoids are often much more potent than their natural counterparts, and their chemical structures can be very different. This means they can have unpredictable and potentially dangerous effects, especially on the cardiovascular system.
So it's even more important to be aware of the risks associated with synthetic cannabinoids. They're not just harmless substitutes for cannabis.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, the legal landscape around synthetic cannabinoids is complicated and always changing. A lot of these compounds are marketed as legal highs, but we really don't know much about their safety or long-term health effects. It's crucial to be extremely cautious with them.
It's kind of like playing roulette with your health. You never really know what you're getting.
That's a great way to put it. It highlights why we need more research, better regulations, and better public awareness about the potential dangers of synthetic cannabinoids.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground again today, from THC and CBD to personalized medicine and synthetic cannabinoids. I feel like I'm getting a much better grasp of the big picture, but I'm sure there's still more to learn.
There's always more to explore. We've dug deep into the science, but next time, we can shift gears and talk about the bigger implications of this research. What does the future hold for cannabinoid-based therapies, especially considering their interaction with hERG channels?
Welcome back. It's the final part of our deep dive into the world of cannabinoids and hERG channels.
It has been quite the journey, exploring this intricate molecular dance and its potential impact on the heart. So what does the future hold? That's what I'm really interested in.
Yeah, me too. We've talked about some potential risks and benefits of cannabinoids like THC and CBD, and also about the exciting possibilities of personalized medicine. So where does all this lead? What does it mean for new therapies being developed?
The future of cannabinoid-based therapies is looking really bright, especially with what we now know about hERG channels. One area that's particularly exciting is the development of targeted therapies that can harness the power of cannabinoids while minimizing those potential risks.
Targeted therapies, huh? What does that mean exactly?
Well, remember how we discussed how different cannabinoids interact with specific receptors and pathways throughout the body? Targeted therapies take advantage of that by designing molecules that are similar to cannabinoids, but that zero in on very specific targets, like ones involved in inflammation or pain. And they do this while avoiding interaction with those hERG channels.
So it's like creating a key that fits a very specific lock. It unlocks the therapeutic benefits without triggering those unwanted side effects.
Exactly, a perfect analogy. This precise approach could really lead to therapies that are more effective and have fewer side effects. Imagine a cannabinoid-based drug that targets only the CB2 receptors in the immune system to reduce inflammation, but it doesn't touch the CB1 receptors in the brain, which are the ones responsible for the psychoactive effects of THC.
Wow, so you can treat inflammation without getting high. That's incredible. Are there other targeted therapies in development? What does that look like?
Absolutely. Scientists are exploring so many possibilities. Cannabinoid-based therapies for things like chronic pain, anxiety, even neurodegenerative diseases and cancer. For example, they're looking at synthetic cannabinoids that target specific pain pathways, again, without affecting hERG channels. This could be a real game changer for people suffering from chronic pain.
The possibilities seem endless. But what are some of the challenges? What's standing in the way of actually bringing these targeted therapies to patients?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is the need for more research, rigorous clinical trials. A lot of the studies we have on cannabinoids have been limited by small sample sizes, or there have been methodological challenges. To really understand the safety and effectiveness of these new therapies, we need large-scale, long-term studies.
That makes sense. We need solid evidence before we can start widely prescribing these treatments.
Right. And then there's the whole legal and regulatory landscape surrounding cannabis, which is a challenge in itself. The laws and regulations are different everywhere, and that makes it really difficult to do research and develop therapies in a consistent way.
Yeah, it's like trying to navigate a maze. And then, of course, there's the stigma that still surrounds cannabis, which is unfortunate, especially with all the scientific evidence that's emerging.
You're absolutely right. That stigma can really hinder research funding, public acceptance, and even patient access to these potentially life-changing treatments. It's so important to keep educating the public and policymakers about the science behind cannabinoids and their therapeutic potential.
It sounds like a long road ahead, but it seems like the future is bright. The potential of cannabinoid-based therapies, especially when you consider their interaction with those hERG channels, is huge.
I completely agree. Research into the endocannabinoid system is constantly evolving, and we can expect to see some truly incredible discoveries and breakthroughs in the years to come.
This deep dive has been incredible, really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of cannabinoids, their potential benefits and risks, and the exciting possibilities for new therapies.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you. And remember, the world of cannabinoid research is always changing, so stay curious.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of cannabinoids and hERG channels. Keep that curiosity alive and never stop exploring the wonders of science.